Join me in welcoming Michelle Renee Hammer. Hey, Michelle, how you doing today?
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege and an honor.
Oh, thanks for being here with us. So your book is called Boundaries for Breakthroughs, Live as God Designed, 8 Essential Keys to Emotional Well-Being. Wow, that's really big. So tell us first a little bit about you and how you show up in the world.
Okay. I know that book's a mouthful, right? I just couldn't decide. And for me, I'm a counselor. I'm a pastoral counselor and a licensed clinician. And I've been doing counseling now for about 25 years. But a lot of early on personal tragedy in my life just took me in that direction, I believe, by God's design. And I learned through my own adversity and the adversity of thousands of other people that I've counseled and now coach certain themes that I noticed that not only lined up with what I learned clinically in college in my master's program and other additional training I took, but biblically. And so that's sort of how I show up in the world. I combine that stuff, and that's the message I'm shouting from the mountaintops because I want to help people get unstuck and out of all the things that just weigh them down and cause them not to just live up to their purpose and everything I believe that they were called and designed to be. So that's kind of a tall order.
You are really bold, and I really applaud you for it in this book. Right from the very even first sentence of
I
the
know.
introduction, you jump into some things some people don't ever even talk about. So
Yes.
I admire you for that. That was pretty awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. I go straight into, preteen assault and sort of how I felt at the time and in the mind of a preteen, because I do work with a lot of ladies that are teenagers and young adults and men too. And you're right, we keep secrets for a long time and those secrets eat us alive. And if this wasn't by God's design, I could still be sitting in a counseling room just listening to people, and my secrets would be with me and him. And select few individuals, but he really kept putting it on my heart to just speak out and speak up for people that aren't speaking up for themselves. And so not only did he give me a voice, but I believe he's calling me to help other people find their voice too, because a lot of the things that people are ashamed of are not even things that they've done. There's things that have been done to them and they're carrying someone else's shame.
So in the book, I mean, you take it all the way from that tragedy. You talk about dating, relationships, marriage. You really go deep with people. Um, what is, what is the thing that started the process of healing for you from that tragedy?
So first I had a complete unraveling, and then when I was at the bottom, at the very bottom in depression with literally psychotic features, I started praying to God. It's not like I didn't believe in God. It's not like I didn't, have an upbringing where I was raised in, a particular faith tradition. But what went on in my home and what went on in my school were like dichotomies. And so what really started my healing journey, I believe, was God, but it really was me asking for help. I actually knew I needed help and I started asking for help. And I didn't get the right helps initially. And I got a lot of poor help too, which is one of the another reasons why I became a counselor. But it was my first step was just to admit that I needed help and to get other people involved. And then just by God's grace and design, I started getting some really good supports and a lot more knowledge of his word. And just those two things together, it just started becoming like my life calling.
There's a real stigma, and I'm not sure why now. I mean, I maybe understand it from back when everybody felt that way, but there still seems to be a real stigma to asking for help and going into therapy and stuff like that. Why
Mhm.
is that?
I know it's so true. And I notice everybody wants a coach, but nobody wants a counselor. And everybody thinks it's cool if they have a coach, they can talk about that. But counseling sort of, a lot of people still keep hush hush. I think it's misinformation that counseling is for crazy people, and counseling means there's something wrong with me. And I tell people all the time, counseling is for everyone who's stuck in anything that they just can't seem to get a handle on. And counseling is for people who have something happening to them. It's not that there's something wrong with them. For example, depression happens to you, anxiety happens to you, trauma happens to you. We don't pick our poison, so to speak, whether it's diabetes or heart disease or anxiety or schizophrenia. This stuff happens to us, but then we own it like it's who we are. And I think that's really hard for people to separate, who they are from what they're thinking and feeling, because so much of our personality is wrapped up in that. It's easy to do that when someone has a physical problem. We can physically see a problem, or we physically have something going on that sort of feels like, oh, that's happening to my body. But I don't think people think in terms of when mental health and emotional stuff's occurring, that it's happening to their mind or their heart. They look at it like, this is who I am, and no one would understand, and I need to hide these things because they're shameful. And they're really not. I think it's a badge of honor when people struggle and have adversity and work to overcome it. I think that's super admirable.
I know, and I was even talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday. It's ironic. A lot of times one of the fears that people have is a quote unquote diagnosis. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm going to be diagnosed as,
Right.
And there's some buzz terms now, it seems like, it's kind of cyclical. Like this is the popular diagnosis right now kind of a thing. But what do you say to the people that are afraid of their quote unquote diagnosis?
Yeah, I think it opens up a can of worms for them probably, right? It's just a term we use. It's just a way to kind of speak in clinical language that this is what's happening to someone, to an insurance company or to another provider who's involved. It's just sort of a way to wrap your mind around a group of symptoms that are happening. For me, when I found out that I was depressed, that was a relief because I finally knew what was happening. I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that I was happy-go-lucky one day. A tragedy happened to me, and now I was like, withering away in myself, and I blamed myself for it. So I think, if we can just be honest and start sharing with somebody we trust, at the other side of that, there's a lot of freedom and healing, and people stay bound up in the fear, like you're saying, the different fears, the fear of a diagnosis, the fear of being judged, the fear of, what they're going to have to go through to get to the other side. But I've been in the pit and been afraid to share. And I've gone through the hard part of healing, and I'd rather be there. I've done both. I think the pit is so much harder because it feels like you're alone and you're caught up in something.
Oh, for sure. And this may be me both understanding psychology enough with having two parents that both have degrees in that.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
And that kind of thing. But can you explain to people the difference between, having a physiological situation, like you mentioned, schizophrenia or bipolar, people that are really truly bipolar versus somebody who you said, you were happy-go-lucky and then you were really massively depressed. And there may have even been therapists that were like, oh, well, she's bipolar,
Right. Yes.
You have a situational thing you're going through.
Yes.
Can you kind of explain the difference for us?
Sure. That's a great question. So physiological things that occur are biologically wired in your body from the time that you're born. They're more of a chemical thing, a chemical neurological imbalance, but you can still have symptoms of many of those things, right? People can seem bipolar and just have gone through trauma, or they can have depression that, as you said, Steve, is situational. And that's because they're grieving and they're hurting. And the symptoms look the same. And that's why I feel oftentimes you need professional support, because we don't often know which one it is. I've had people come in and had depression their whole life. And when we've dialed it back and peeled the layers of the onion, they do have a chemical imbalance. They're saying, I just always felt sad and nothing was wrong and my life was really good and I never got why I wasn't happy. And then there's other people who know that they know this isn't how I normally feel. So what's going on with me? And that takes a sorting out of looking at your circumstances and your history and determining. And I really wish that for depression and anxiety and all those sorts of things that we had, we had the ability to look at them like you do with like an X-ray machine or an MRI or whatever they call the different CAT scans. And they are doing a lot of stuff with the brain, and they're seeing people in states of depression and in, panic attack, as it's happening and in a bipolar manic episode, and noticing the brain does change, but we just don't have that capacity like we do with our body to just notice that stuff. So I also tell people, take your time. People can't just meet you one time and say, oh, you're bipolar. No, it doesn't work like that. I'd be leery of any doctor or counselor or physician that just carte blanche, assumes something after meeting you for 10 minutes, because it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, for sure. So the book is Boundaries for Breakthroughs. How do you, or why do you need boundaries in order to make it through your breakthrough?
So I know, and that's sort of someone said to me a couple of weeks ago, they don't really go together. Like if I think boundaries, I think wall, and if I think breakthrough, you're like pushing down the wall. And that was important for me because it's just the type of boundaries you need to get thrust forward. So sometimes our boundaries in life need to be more emotional or in our own thinking or with other people. So we have traps that we're caught up in, and we have to set limits in those areas to get to where we're trying to get to, which is a healthier place. And so I noticed there's just 8 different areas of life where that happens, and that if people would start to set limits there, they could take care of themselves better, especially people who have hurt and pain and trauma and different emotional and mental health things going on, because it really does oftentimes, as I said earlier, knock our self-worth. Where they say like 80% of people at some point in their life struggle with, are they worthy? And usually it's after they're going through something difficult. It's hard not to personalize our stuff. It's sort of like we make ourselves our own mini God, and we're supposed to make things go well. And really, God is God. If something's happening, hey, it's not catching him by surprise what's going on there. I believe oftentimes the hardships get us to our healing if we allow it.
Wow. So, and I think it's important to note, you've told me this before, in this particular case, you're talking about emotional boundaries, which isn't necessarily what people talk about usually.
Right, exactly. Usually people are talking about physical boundaries or, like specific situational boundaries, like boundaries in dating, boundaries in marriage, boundaries at work. I'm talking, feelings boundaries. We can't let our emotions and mind run amok, and a lot of times when we're wounded, that's what's happening. And so the coping mechanisms and the resources, and even God's word has a lot to say about, the situation of our heart and what we do about our thinking. And so if we can set those limits, I see a lot of people getting well. And it's interesting, Steve, that a lot of people who come to me who are Christians or who, have a faith tradition and are willing to incorporate their faith into their healing process do a lot better than people who aren't. Who are just trying to rely on the next strategy or the next pill or the next, current fad of, oh, this will make you feel less depressed. Usually it's deeper than that.
So, totally unfair question. Of the 8 essential keys today, at least right this minute, which is your favorite kid? No, not really. What is your favorite of the 8 emotional keys, that you can bring up to us?
I think community. So one of the keys is to have community, a trustworthy place where you can like land your head and talk about things that bother you, things that, you're struggling in, and just more than counseling or coaching appointment once a week or whatever, is to have a place where you feel safe so that you can, really walk alongside other people. That's what Jesus did. He didn't live alone. He's God. He could have done it all by himself. He didn't need 12 close disciples and a bunch more, people following him around. And he's God and he's triune. And so if God is triune, and when Jesus was on this earth, he walked with other people, then oftentimes I see people struggling because they're hiding in their secrecy and their shame, and they're going it alone. So they need community.
So, and we all have our great excuses, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we went through COVID and we discovered
exactly.
the joy of working from home, which some people don't, but a lot of us. And then you throw in things like, the mother of a newborn, or, things like that, where, how do you have community when you don't have any time in your life, or it feels that way anyway? How do you do that?
I know. And I think, that's one good thing the book talks about is, what community looks like and where we can find community and how we determine safe community. And I think it's basically finding like-minded persons. So for the woman at home with the newborn, perhaps it's, right outside her door in her neighborhood, or a MOPS group at her church, or a best friend, somebody that she can just start with sharing if it's not, a professional. Because oftentimes in the professional situations that I'm in, we are talking about where's your support system, where's your community, and the boundaries in community, right? Because we don't want to just tell everybody everything. You've seen that person in the grocery store who's just sharing with anyone she can find. It's like, oh boy, that's too much for now, and I don't even know you. But then you see other people that won't talk to anybody. I think there's a balance in the middle where we find that fellowship of like-minded individuals who we can walk through life with, whether it's a small group or we start our own, like, I don't know, monthly friends night, and just with people you trust. I know that's hard to find too sometimes.
The other side to that is, and I think back about what we were talking about earlier about, when you were a young girl and going through trauma.
Yes.
Kids or other people who live in that situation and aren't even able to, like kids, to get out of that. How do they begin to create emotional boundaries in their life in that type of situation?
So good. That's so powerful. So, you have kids who are in unhealthy family environments and oftentimes want it to be different and know that it's not right just in their gut, and finding, and then they might have families that don't believe in counseling, or don't want the secrets disclosed or don't want professionals involved. And so if that child, that kid, or that preteen, reaches out to anybody, oftentimes it starts, that process like a school counselor or another friend that they trust. It's really hard for them though, because when they start building in healthy supports, they have to go home every day to an unhealthy environment. I can recall in my own personal life in high school, I was talking with a school counselor about what was going on in my home. And she said, put your headphones on and get in another room. Like, you don't want to hear the conflict. You don't need to, be all wrapped up in it. Cause I'm like at my ear at the door, like what's happening now? Cause you never knew what would happen next. And she's saying that's so unhealthy, but that's how I felt, that's how I survived. If I knew it was coming, I knew it was coming. And she said, that's so unhealthy. You just need to let that be and do you. You're a teenager now. You have, you work, you play sports, you have school. Just ignore it. Just get yourself out of that mess. And that was huge for me. And at the time I thought, how rude, like my family matters. But she was basically saying, set a boundary, don't allow yourself to go do something that causes you to be upset because you feel the need to know. You're going to know anyway, because, it's a crap show over there. And so that'd be like one example, is just having somebody speak into their life and start, modeling for them healthy boundaries and building them up and seeing where their strengths are and encouraging them in that to get involved in areas that, would bring them value when that's not happening at home. And if it's a scary environment or abusive environment, that's a whole nother story, that's even more challenging and more difficult.
Yeah, for sure. So for a person who wants or knows now they need help from you, how can they go deeper with you? Other than, of course, getting the book.
Oh, okay. So they could always reach out to our, counseling center. It's Turning Leaf Counseling and Consultation. And it would be www.turningleafcounselingandconsultation.com. We have admin staff there, and there's 8 therapists there right now who do coaching and counseling and would be more than willing to help somebody in need if they were thinking, okay, I want to take the first step. We have Christian counselors. And we also have secular counselors, interestingly enough. So some people don't want to talk to a Christian pastoral counselor. And so they want to talk to somebody who doesn't have any specifics in that way. And so we have those too.
The book is called Boundaries for Breakthrough. Live as God Designed, 8 Essential Keys to Emotional Well-Being by Michelle Renee Hammer. Such a great book. Oh gosh, you guys, you got to get it. Michelle, thanks so much for spending some time with us here on the show today.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you. Have a good one.